Hi, everybody. Angela Catalessa here with Barry James today. Really excited to have this conversation with you, Barry, because we've had several conversations that weren't recorded and they were really amazing.
Yeah,
so-
absolutely. I mean, there's a couple of them I do wish I had recordings of. So I'm looking forward to this too, Angela. Thank you.
I know. So before we dive in, can we just say how we met? We found each other on LinkedIn, right?
I think that's right. Yeah, yeah. It was definitely through the word polymath in one form or another, but I think it was on LinkedIn. Yeah.
And why were you searching the word polymath? Like what brought you to that?
Um, well, actually, I originally searched the word polymath. It wasn't on this occasion. It was a few months ago. It's only a matter of months ago.
Hmm.
Because I realized there was a problem with my LinkedIn profile in that people go on there and go, and sometimes they'd write to me or tell me, you can't possibly have done all of those things. Well, I have. You can't possibly have these different, experiences and skills. And well, I have. And so I was just looking for a way to say to the world, hey, actually it's for real, I didn't make any of this stuff up. It's not a big deal, but and I kind of, it's really difficult to find a word, and obviously polymath is the word, and I found the word polymath. I googled this, and then I found a group that Dr. Barbara Kleeb runs, and oh my goodness, I found my tribe. You know what that's like, right? And then so since then I've been very interested in talking to the polymaths, hence we're headed for the Meet the Polymaths channel very soon, and kind of understanding the whole thing.
Yeah. So, and you're also a member now of the Polymath Place Facebook group. And so I'm going to consider this like a member highlight. I just want to learn who you are, what makes you tick, what's your background, what do you care about? And I want to learn from you too, particularly because I know you're very passionate about economic equality worldwide. And you've been doing a lot of really cool stuff, including just recently. And so where should we begin? Why don't we start with, can you give listeners and viewers just a sense of your professional background? Like, where do you live? Where are you from? Just the basics so we understand who you are at a high level.
So originally I come from a place everyone will relate to straight away, Liverpool, because everyone's heard of the Beatles, right? So that's where I was born, spent the early part and grew up, spent the early part of my life. For the last sort of 29, 30 years or so, I've been just the other side of the mountain range, the Pennines, here in Sheffield, where the steel comes from. And my career, I studied psychology, and then, in the process of, well, I had already become deeply immersed in IT or computing as it was then, from when I was at school. I was fortunate enough to go back a very long way. My first programming was done on paper tape, believe it or not. I hasten to add that the computer was obsolete at the time, but it's a long time ago. So most of my career has been in digital innovation, if you like. So I spent most of my career in medtech, in what we would now call fintech, in what I these days call Jurassic fintech. Way back when, people generally didn't have computers before we got the PC or and the Apple and its precursors even. So I've kind of lived through all of that, and until about 2 or 3 years ago.
I just want to ask a question, like a pause. So I want to continue hearing about like your background and what you're passionate about, but I kind of want to pause it right there because you said digital innovation, you've been a tech guy, computing guy, and I kind of just want to ask either now or later, can we talk about AI, Chat GPT in particular, at some point? And is polymathy in human beings necessary, more or less the same, now that tech is becoming more conscious and sentient and capable? So at some point, I'd love to pick your brain, whether it's now or later. And I know because we started having this chat in the Polymath Place Facebook group recently. And so I'd love to hear from somebody who's been in that field for decades, and also who's passionate about polymathy and identifies that way himself, what your thoughts are.
I think it's pretty much the equivalent of the invention of steam engines and pneumatic machines that have got muscles much bigger than we have, can dig a ditch in a fraction of the time, but can't do everything. So did the steam engines and the JCBs and all of that, put navies that used to dig the canals and the roads out of work? Of course, largely it did, yeah, but not completely. Did it put surveyors out of work? No. Did it put planners out of work? No. Are there more roads as a result? Of course there are. And I think it's very parallel with that. So I was just playing with ChatGPT today, literally. There's a talk I'm going to give tomorrow, and I will be giving the talk that it wrote for me, but blooming heck, it's not half speeded up the process of giving the talk I will give, because it's like having a research assistant to pull all that stuff together for me. So and in terms of polymathy, or certainly in terms of the way that we should be educating our children and the way that we should be moving as a civilization, we should be making, we should be moving away from what David Graeber called bullshit jobs. There's plenty of those.
I love that, bullshit jobs. I'm gonna have to start using that.
Yeah, and we should be.
What I do.
Yeah, we should be starting to change the way we educate children, move out of the factory model of education, which just kills the genius in children. We know it does. We're regimenting them, and we should be moving towards releasing that genius and releasing the ability to think critically, the ability to think creatively, and to do the things that make us more fully human. Digging ditches doesn't make us terribly human. Filling forms in doesn't either.
Exactly. The irony is that advanced technologies free us to be more human. They don't take away our humanity as competitors as much as they relieve us from doing things that in some ways make us robotic.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. I'll just say my answer to the question as a polymathy scholar is that we live in an age of information, but we also live in an age of misinformation. It's really a problem. And so human beings, no matter what intelligence exists on the planet, whether it's silicone-based or carbon-based, we must maintain our own faculties. We must maintain our own critical thinking abilities, because we're going to get information from all over the place unless we choose to live in a silo, in an echo chamber. If we choose to ignore the full picture of things, maybe then we don't have to think and we can just allow the continual brainwashing right into us. But as long as thinking for ourselves is something we value, then polymathy absolutely sets us up to do that better, regardless of what other human beings are intelligent or whatever tech is intelligent. We still must be able to think for ourselves and think creatively and innovatively as well. Even if tech can be creative with digital art or writing essays or whatever it does later on, whatever capabilities come to fruition in the future, doesn't matter. We still need to be able to also be creative and innovative in our own human ways.
Absolutely. And wasn't it Steve Jobs that said that in the early days when he was talking about what the PC was for, he said it was the bicycle for the mind, on the basis that we can't run as fast as other things, but we can create a bicycle. It means we can go faster than and so on. And isn't it just like that with AI? It's a motorbike for the mind, if you like. Yeah,
I think AI can enhance our capacities. It still will need a human operator. It still will need a human check. It can be wrong. We should not relegate thinking and creativity to technology. We still need to be our fullest best selves, regardless of what's going on with artificial intelligence or in
Absolutely.
tandem with it. And so I would argue that polymathy is more important now than ever because of this age of information and misinformation and technology that needs oversight and correction, perhaps, and humanity. And so it's not that AI, some people may argue, oh, AI means we don't need to think anymore. We can take it easy. They're going to be way better than us. Let's give up and roll over. No, no, we need to be able to think critically for ourselves. We need to be able to self-author our own lives. We need to be able to not be machines programmed and put in boxes and dehumanized. We don't need that anymore. I
And
think we're going to become more and more human as tech frees us to do so.
And the other thing that AI can't do that we can and should do is responsibility, take responsibility. So a human is responsible, and quite rightly, for what an AI does, and we need to keep that line of responsibility, and we need to bear that in mind. In many ways, we've kind of one of the biggest problems we've got these days, and I'm jumping ahead now, is governance. And our governance is failing, and we're allowing processes to dictate to us and to damage people in all sorts of different ways. And that's because we've abrogated responsibility. We got to stop doing that.
Yes, exactly. Oh gosh, we could dive into that so much. Our institutions that humans have co-created, not any one person, but the institutions we've co-created as nations, as states, as whatever level of government you want to look at, or even globally, are failing, are broken, are causing human suffering and preventing human thriving. There's a whole lot of inequality and a whole lot of just stupidity in the way we've designed our institutions and systems, which perpetuate keeping power centralized instead of decentralizing it so everybody has a chance to have a good life. So I know you're very passionate about this sort of thing. Why don't we pause on the AI discussion? I have a feeling we may come back to that. But let's get back to who you are and what makes you tick, what you're passionate about, what background you have, what you're working on. So what else would you like to share with people viewing this?
I spent most of my working life in, as you know, the forefront of technology usually, but there's a reason for that. Coming from the psychology's never gone away, and it's about people really. It's about making the world. Technology for my whole career has been remaking the world. People kind of talk about it as if we've got new tools, and we've got new tools, but actually what we've done is transformed our environment. So we now live in an environment which is formed, which is maintained. You take away the digital from our environment now, it becomes a very different environment. So it's kind of and that's a category difference. It's a huge difference. A tool is one thing, an environment is another, and that's a really important. So I've taken a completely different turn over the last 2 or 3 years, particularly since COVID, when, having spent my life working with technology, realizing that because we have these existential crises, the crises of inequality you've already referred to, which has been getting worse now for 40, 50 years. We haven't turned it around. The climate and pollution and the climate change and the ecological disaster that we've created, we've known about this for 40, 50 years. And we don't even seem to be in either case able to slow it down, let alone turn it around. So I kind of launched into I guess it's becoming a new career over the last 2 or 3 years, starting with what I thought was going to be a book project, may yet yield a book called Humane Economics. to try to understand what are the roots of that, and specifically why the world is working the way it is, why it's driving those two things, and why we can't change that, and going back through the history of economic thinking, and understanding how it's moved out of economics, the thinking, the dogma moved out of economics, and has taken root, you know, at the base of civilization, in the back brain of civilization, if you like. So our operating system has been corrupted. So in government and in the corporate world, the way we make decisions gives us exactly the results that we're seeing. It's exactly what you should expect when you've got an operating system that, and we can sort of trace this through in practical terms as well, in the way government works, in the way corporate works, that maximize profit, that externalize everything else, and you know, keep us on this road and accelerating on it. So that was the beginning of a new phase.
Yeah. And Barry, first of all, I think it's really cool what you said about tools versus environment. That's a good delineation. Regarding global warming, I'm very concerned about like what happens to our species if we can't right this ship. And it may already be too late. I don't know. We don't seem to be doing a very good job about fixing the global warming situation. Elon Musk is preparing another planet for us just in case, so we could send some people there. I mean, that's really what it's coming to at this point. It's scary. Yeah. But the other thing I wanted to say in response to everything you just said is, you know, I worked in government my whole adult life. I mean, I worked for the state of California where I grew up. I interned for the governor, and then I worked at the University of California, Los Angeles, UCLA. I interned at the White House, and then I spent 15 years working in the federal government, including at the office of the president under Bush and Obama. And so I've been in the belly of that beast. And I've also studied the courts and the prison system. And the conclusion I have come to is that our government is extremely broken, not everywhere. It's not that all the employees are bad people or anything like that, but what ends up happening, what I've seen happen in government, and really probably in any organization, is once it gets so big, it becomes such a behemoth and also a bureaucracy that it can turn bad. It stops focusing on its mission and its constituents, its clients, if you will, its customers, and it begins to serve itself. It exists now to make easy, lucrative jobs as much as possible for the people who work there, to provide job security. Much of government is unionized. I mean, it's really hard to get rid of someone in government, even if there's sleeping on the job. I mean, it's almost impossible to kick someone out of government because of the way they have structured themselves to give themselves job security. So government functions in its own self-interest, and it can be quite corrupt and quite stupid and quite inefficient. And this is the entity we look to make our societies better. But it's failing. It's failing. So what is the solution then? If government, in my opinion, is too broken to fix itself?
Yeah, I think there's a reason for that. And I think size is an issue.
Size.
I mean, I was talking to someone about this the other day. He said, I work for a huge organization, and what the organization did fundamentally was evil, you know, in the sense that some of the things that it did were, you know, crush people and so on. He said, in the way that corporates very often do, you know, they're like you say, behemoths that sort of tread on people in the course of seeking their own ends. And he said, you know, I looked high and low. I looked for the Department of Evil, and there wasn't one. There isn't a Department of Evil, but evil is done. And how is that? Yeah. And I think it's this. I think that there really was a change that we actually traced through the work with humane economics that came about. I think the big milestone, the first real visible milestone of the change was in 1970, when a doctrine, and it was a doctrine, it called it a doctrine as well, was published in the New York Times. And it was Milton Friedman who talked about the Friedman doctrine, that the social responsibility of business is to maximize its profit. The social responsibility. And that was the distillation of a philosophy that actually came out of a project that Hayek put together, that he was involved in from 1947. You can go and look up the Mount Pelerin project. It's out there. You find it on Wikipedia. And that created this philosophy, and that was hugely influential. And it specifically externalizes humanity and people, doesn't it? And that was the beginning. And he presented it actually in very sociopathic terms. If you go and look at the typical way that a sociopath will argue a case, sort of McCarthyite would be one way of putting it. It was very McCarthyite in tone. And basically at the time saying, you know, the tone was very much, and if you don't agree with this, well, you're wrong and you're a pinko. I mean, we're talking, you know, not so far back enough for that to be a real threat, right? And that became embedded within the corporate world. And it suffused the corporate world. And then a little later, it moved from the corporate world also to the world of politics and government. So in the era of, most people kind of recognize this a little bit with Thatcher and Reagan, because they were, again, the visible public face. And Thatcher, for example, and I think Reagan as well, was very much saying, look, you know, we need more business. Here we were saying, look, we've got to start running our health service as a business. There he was saying, you know, we've got to shrink government to make room for business. And by business, meaning this sociopathic ethic, and it is sociopathic, that that as a result has become the operating system, by which I mean the means by which decisions are made, both in the corporate world and in in politics and government. And we're trying to redress it a little bit at the moment, but it's kind of like window dressing, ESG, and all of these things, because we kind of lost any framework beyond that. We're kind of lost in this world, and actually, it's kind of, you know, there's not. I mean, you have to go back to the 60s really to understand how a world might work differently to this. It's that far back. And I'm not, this isn't nostalgia for the 60s, by the way, although the Beatles were great. But, you know, the world worked in a completely different way, and thinking and value systems worked in a completely different way.
Yeah, I mean, my impression of the 60s and 70s was that people actually cared about things like loving one another, you know? And there's a couple questions I have. First of all, you mentioned sort of about ethics, the ethics of our current system. And to me, it's really lacking in ethics and morality and integrity and doing the right thing, because it's so focused on the financial bottom line, profit, and profit for the people in power, not for equal sharing of profits.
Yeah.
And what happens to humanity if we don't adjust that? Like if those in power just keep getting more and more and the have-nots just keep having not, like do we ever reach our collective potential? Do we ever figure out our or just do we just keep having inequality and fighting and unrest, civil unrest? I mean, isn't there a cost to be paid that's not financial if we keep making profit our primary driver?
I think we're already paying a very heavy price in humanity. But I think it's nothing compared to the price we will pay if we don't make, you know, a turn away from this very soon. There's a book coming out this next week. I just heard about it today. And, you know, it couldn't be from a more mainstream author. So Martin Wolf is the long-serving, I think he's the economics editor for the Financial Times. And look, you know, we've been hearing from the ecology folks, from the green folks for some time now, that you know, our civilization is threatened. Yes. And increasingly loudly, we've been hearing that from the head of the UN, who's saying, you know, we're headed for a cliff edge and our foot is still on the accelerator. And it's not been heeded. Martin Wolf, who I just mentioned, his book, its thesis is that we are seeing the breakdown of democracy right now. And he's obviously a champion, you know, given who he is and where he works and his career. He's obviously a champion for capitalism, but he's saying capitalism and democracy have slipped into a bad place, a bad relationship, and we're in danger of destroying democracy. And it's observably true. And I think for me, the ecological, at the moment, it's almost a case of which is going to get us first. Is it going to be the collapse of the financial system? Is it going to be the rage? Or is it going to be the, you know, the ecological? And I'm not a doom merchant. I've never said, I mean, you know, thought this at any other stage in my life. But I think we are really going to have to take these warnings seriously and start to find ways to change the way that we think, because the way that we think is getting us to this point.
Yeah.
And it's our civilization that is at risk. It's not humanity, although there's a huge amount of suffering involved in the downfall of a civilization. Yeah. Humanity will survive in some form, but I don't want the 8 billion people to you know, who are on Earth at the moment, to be whittled down to however many are going to be left at the end of that, and a huge amount of suffering in the meantime.
Sounds like hell on earth is a possibility if we don't figure this out. So Barry, one thing I want to share, I went to Greece last year. I loved going to Greece. And while I was in Athens, I went on a tour. You know, democracy started in Greece. That's where it first began. And the tour guide she synthesized what democracy is in a short catchphrase, which has stuck with me. And she said, democracy is everybody matters. Everybody gets a say. And capitalism doesn't quite match democracy. Capitalism is sort of like, well, people matter who have money and who can exchange, who can amass wealth. Those are the ones that matter. That's what capitalism seems to imply. And I mean, I'm not sure what the better model is, but capitalism has benefits and it has drawbacks, that's for sure. And I'm not an economic expert like you, so I'm excited to learn more about economics. But that's one observation I have, that if democracy really is everybody counts, are we even in a democracy anymore? Really?
Let me give you a historical perspective on that. We don't have to go back too far. And that's a great summary. It's a great, you know, little aphorism of you know, or saying everybody matters. You don't actually have, again, if you were to go back to the 50s or the 60s or any time before that, we had a different, we didn't have the capitalism then that we have now. What we have now is an ultra form of capitalism. It's an extreme form of capitalism. And one of the signatures of it is, you touched on just now, is my dollars give me more votes than my vote.
You can buy power. Money gets you power and influence and prestige and access. Everybody doesn't matter when you can buy your way into power and influence and control and domination and unethical practices, actually. And then what ends up happening is those who have less money are forgotten and treated like very, very poorly.
And this isn't an insult to the system as it is. It's just true and traceably true. You know, I've spent enough time in Parliament here. I know, you know, enough to know it's very much parallel with the other side of the pond, to know how decisions are assessed and how they get made, and to know that we've got one word, lobbying, for two very different things, in my view. So lobbying used to mean that if you had an issue, you could go and see your member of parliament and raise that issue, make them aware of it, and they'd take it into account. That's called lobbying. That's very different from a huge multinational corporation that has unlimited funds to pay a team of lobbyists, which they do, with, you know, very skilled in creating a story, very skilled in finding the people within the parliamentary circles who will be receptive to that story, very skilled at either persuading them or incentivizing them in various ways of that. When you've got an unlimited amount of money, that's a different kind of lobbying. And I think we need de-lobbying. And I think that the latter one I was just describing, I would call pay or paid lobbying. That's very different from democratic lobbying. And we've had one or two half-hearted attempts here at limiting lobbying or making it more accountable, and the lobbyists managed to get that pushed back. But so how could we fix it? Well, here's one way it could be fixed. So first of all, we recognize that there are different kinds of lobbying. There's lobbying that is paid, trying to get your way, using a team of paid lobbyists. And then there's democratic lobbying. So what would be fair would be if for every $1,000, $1,000, $1 million, I as a corporation spend on lobbying, I was obliged to put the same amount into a pot and made available for civic lobbying, for whoever wanted to take it up to come and speak on behalf of the people to those same issues.
Yeah, the people. Remember, I mean, in the United States, our government is supposed to be by the people, for the people.
Yeah.
Not for profit, not for businesses, not for corporations, not for agendas, for the real people living their life, and for all of them, not just some of them.
Yeah.
You
And
know,
I can tell you,
real quick too, one of the things, because I've been studying the courts, I've seen how much justice is up for purchase in America today. Even getting bailed out. Oh, if you got enough money, we'll let you out. We'll let you not be incarcerated for a while. In America, when you are you know, in court, if you don't have money to pay for an attorney, one is assigned to you, and frequently they're overworked, underpaid, and don't do a very good job. And so those are the people who, poor people are the ones in prison. The rich people buy their way out of it a lot of the time. So prisons are where we send poor people. And by the way, in the state of California, for example, we spend $106,000 per year per inmate. We spend more on sending people to prison than we spend on our educational system in all 50 states of this country. Can you believe that? That our priorities are to punish poor people for doing drugs or participating in a robbery.
And
Rather spend more money punishing them than just helping them not be poor anymore so they don't have to do that. It's a stupid way of rehabilitating people. They call it correcting and rehabilitating. And I'm like, the whole thing is just so stupid and inhumane. What are we doing?
Absolutely. In parallel here, again, if we go back 20, 30, 40 years, it was recognized that there was an imbalance, and basically people without large amounts of money couldn't get access to justice. So we actually had a scheme for this. It was called legal aid, so that ordinary people, if they needed justice, they could go to court, and as they couldn't pay, there was a way of getting at least some legal representation. That was court and court and court and court. It no longer exists. So, you know, we have the recognition, implicit but clear recognition of the fact that without that, you don't have access to justice. And it's now the case in this country, as you much as you described, that the majority of people, the 99%, or at least the 90%, have got no access to justice, and can be overridden just on the basis of someone who's rich.
Yeah, and also, I don't know, I think it's much worse in the United States than it is in the UK, but the amount of sentence that we give people, the amount of time we require them to be incarcerated is pretty excessive. And also totally counterproductive. Like I said, like, it doesn't actually help these people become better. It actually traumatizes them. It exposes them to gangs. It exposes them to drugs. It traumatizes them, and really it's human torture. There's human torture occurring using taxpayer dollars all over this country. That is
and I have to tell you that is being recognized around the world these days. America is becoming known for this. You know, it's a bit of an open secret. Let me ask you, why do you think it is? Why is American society?
It's money.
Yeah, okay.
Prisons, even those run by the government, are businesses that exist to create jobs and a profit for corporations who service those prisons. Everybody in that system is incentivized to keep as many people in prison as humanly possible. And also the courts which send people to prison are incentivized to get people found guilty, because it makes them look good. Like, oh, look, I got another win in court. Yeah. I'm the district attorney and I want to get as many people convicted as possible because it's showing I'm keeping my city streets safe. Yeah. And really, it's just traumatizing members of their own community unfairly, and not actually helping them, which is what they exist to be able to do. It's what I said, an organization gets big enough and it starts to serve itself rather than its constituents, its clients, its customer base. People turn themselves into monsters as they dehumanize other people. They do dehumanize someone else. They actually are lowering their own humanity in the process.
Isn't that an inevitability when the guiding star isn't anything to do with humanity? In fact, it excludes humanity, but is, as we said before, the maximization of profit.
The maximization of profit. And, you know, a district attorney who wants to advance and to go to higher levels within the government system, you know, the more convictions, the more criminals they get off the street, the better it makes them look. Never mind if those people deserve to go, or deserve to go for as long as they do, or as difficultly as they do. The prison, let me just say a little bit more of how money works a little bit. Not that I'm the deepest expert in the economics of the prison world, but my understanding is that, you know, the correctional officers who work there, by the way, I've met many of them. As a general rule, they're not the best and the brightest. They're the people who couldn't make it into the police forces, and so they go work at a prison instead. And they make a decent salary. You know, 80,000, 100,000 a year, maybe a little bit more. So it's a good job for someone who's probably uneducated and blue collar, basically, of a really ramped up version of a security guard. And they're heavily unionized in the state of California, where I focus most of my studying of the prison system and the courts. The union in for the CCPOA, what is it? California Correctional Officers Peace Association. They call themselves a peace association, which I find just really comical, because they really don't promote peace. They promote dehumanization and control of the inmates that they're there to protect.
Yeah.
And they're heavily unionized, and their union pays representatives, political appointees in the state of California so much money that whoever they back wins something like 95% of the time. This correctional officers union really has a stranglehold on California politics. They pick who wins.
Wow.
They promote, and they're the biggest lobbyists in California, and nobody even realizes it or talks about it. And so what ends up happening is they can do whatever they want. They're so powerful. They can kill inmates, they can torture them, they can rape them. And these human beings who have found themselves in prison can't do much of anything about it at all. And so, and those people are incentivized to get as much overtime, to keep their jobs. Like there's a financial interest for these basically highly unskilled laborers, you know, who carry guns and tell people what to do, but who aren't otherwise highly educated or capable in many ways. What else can I tell you? Oh, a lot of the vendors, you know, who have, for example, if you are in a California prison, you are entitled to buy packages on a quarterly basis. And the vendors, there's only a handful of like 5 or less vendors that you can purchase from. And they can set whatever pricing they want. The phones, I mean, I've heard from prison families about in California, they recently made phone calls free, but for many years in the past, families might have to spend, I don't know, $10 on a 20-minute phone, 15-minute phone call just to be able to speak to their loved one. They're just if you care about someone in prison, you are also dehumanized and not treated properly, not treated well, because they're not seen as fully human. People in prison are seen as criminals. They're given a label, and they're not seen as fully human. But so much of it is driven. And by the way, there are for-profit prisons that we allow in America as well. But even when it's run for government, it's still for profit for the people who work there.
Yeah.
They want their job security and their promotions and their overtime and their bonuses and their benefits and their pensions. And so they are incentivized to keep the prison population as high as possible. They will frame people. They will tell lies. They will write up immoral, unethical reports. Not all the time. Much of what they do is accurate and correct. But there's a percentage, a chunk, not a sliver, a chunk of correctional officers who are corrupt. And we allow it, and we don't fire them. And if they're found to be corrupt, you know what they do? They don't get fired. They get bumped to another prison to go work over there and do it over there next.
So how can we fix it? I know it's probably a big question. This is a big question. It may not be our question for today, but I think we should ask it nonetheless.
It starts with our laws and our courts, I think. We have, in my opinion, prison should only be for like murderers and rapists. If you have a drug problem, and maybe drug dealers, real criminals, but if you have a drug problem, or if you steal something, or if to me, you're someone who needs help more than punishment. And so I think we need to shift away from the punishment model, the lock 'em up model, the good old boy model. We need to shift away from like wanting revenge on people to wanting to make our world a better place, even for imperfect human beings who mess up sometimes. Because we all mess up. Only some of us get caught and some of us don't. That's another thing. The courts overpunish the amount of sentencing. And also, when we have economic issues and we want to save money, cutting how much time we send people away to prison at $106,000 a year per person is a great solution. It's a great solution. So it has to start with the laws. It has to start with the courts. We need to be more humane and more care, and we really need to understand the root cause. I've studied who's in prison. I've heard their stories. I've interviewed people, and who's in prison are people who are poor, people with childhood traumas, broken families, parents with drug addiction issues, or parents who weren't around. These people are just trying to survive. They're trying to, so they may participate in a robbery just to not die. They may take drugs to numb out and get a reprieve from their hellish realities. And those people don't need incarceration. They need help. They need help. And our laws don't allow really for that, at least not as much as they should. The way the prisons are done too, I mean, man, you should see the conditions they're living in, and the violence and the gangs and the aggression. It's just traumatizing to all these little boys who just want to be loved. They just want to be loved. And they love, what they do is they join gangs so they can feel a sense of family that they don't have. And then they offer violence and protection to each other as a sign of their love and affection, and also for their own safety and security. But then if you're in an out group, violence.
Yeah. I don't have an I don't have an answer, and I don't think there are any instant answers for this, but I have a lens that I think is helpful. And that is that we know for certain, psychology is in no doubt about the fact that there's more than one kind of human being, and that what I'm talking about is sociopaths, psychopaths and sociopaths. And as you know, sociopaths have no fellow feeling. They have no ability to understand others' feelings. And for a sociopath, other people are just objects. Yes. And one of the characteristics of sociopaths, and one of the worrying things about society as a whole, is not just that the proportion of sociopaths has been increasing over recent decades. And I think it's not unrelated to what we were talking about earlier. We've created a sociopathic ethic in society. But they increasingly find their ways into positions of leadership and positions of power. And obviously you've been describing some of the positions of power within the within the prison system, for example. So what do we do about this?
So I have some thoughts on this. I think.
Well, let me just finish one little bit.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
What do we do about this? We pretend that we don't. We do nothing.
We do nothing.
We do nothing about this. Do we screen policemen and prison officers for this? No. Do we screen? And
there are sociopaths working in the prisons. Trust me.
Absolutely. And guess what? They'll end up leading other people into their mindsets and ways. They're
a gang. They're their own gang.
So I have one suggestion for this, and then we'll come. Then I want to hear yours as well, please. But it's this. Why not? Why aren't we doing those things? We've got to do it carefully. We've got to do it thoughtfully. But there are questions that you can ask a sociopath that will tell you whether they're a sociopath or whether that person is a sociopath or not. There are screening questions that you can ask. We're just not asking them.
Yeah. I think most sociopaths, maybe not all, but most of them were not born that way, I don't think. I think people become sociopaths because they've had so much trauma that they can't think about other people's needs. All they can do is survive and focus on what I need to do to make it and survive and not die. So people become they lose their sensitivity to being considerate, to having an outward mindset. That's what one way of saying it, to being other oriented instead of self-oriented. sociopaths have just lost their sensitivity that they probably were born with, but because of so many repeated traumas, they couldn't keep caring about how other people think and feel. All they could do was focus on their own needs. And the same things happen, actually. I've come to the conclusion. I'm curious what you think of this. Okay. I'm going to link it back to the sociopaths in a minute, but I have made it to some pretty high echelons. I was a White House intern. I've worked for presidents. I have a doctoral degree. I've been around a lot of very high achievers and highly successful people in, at the epicenter of power, really. And I've come to the conclusion based on what I've seen around me and also my own experiences as a recovering overachiever, that the people who seek out power are frequently doing it as a trauma response themselves, because they're trying to prove I'm capable, I'm worthy, I'm lovable. Look at me, look at all I can do. Do you like me? Am I worthy? Am I lovable? So the people who are the highest achievers and make it to positions of power are frequently highly traumatized. And guess what? Sociopaths, highly traumatized. Everybody in prison, highly traumatized before prison and in prison. And so many of our problems that we have in humanity are linked to trauma. I think we've got to figure out a way to stop this root cause of childhood traumas and the domino effects. I don't think we can ever stop it, but can we reduce it? And step one, by the way, I can't tell you the exact percentage, but a very high percentage of the people in America's prisons were people born who weren't planned for. Teen pregnancies, young pregnant poverty. And so I think one real practical solution would be to launch like some campaigns to prevent pregnancies. You have to get a permit to own certain types of animals in this country. Do you have to get a permit to create a human being and be in charge of their well-being? No. There are no requirements and no checks. And I'm not suggesting the government start checking too much, because the government is not effective. They will create problems. We cannot trust their competency. But I think as one real practical way, maybe birth control just needs to be free in this country or something. I don't know. But people shouldn't keep having babies they're not really ready for. And I can tell you, I had my daughter when I was 35. I had the career, I had the money, I had the job, I had the degrees. I really wanted to be a mom. I was ready. She was planned for. I'm a very dedicated mom, and it's still the hardest thing I've ever done.
Yeah.
I was ready and dedicated. And there are so many people having kids who really shouldn't, because they end up the cycle goes on and on.
Yeah. I'm in sympathy in many ways with what you're saying, but I'd say a couple of things. One is we've done the experiment with free contraception, and I agree with free contraception. It should be available for all the good reasons that you've mentioned, and probably some others as well. But it doesn't have that effect. It doesn't stop the trauma. It may have a small effect, but it doesn't have that overall effect. And I would say, I wish this were not true, but I don't think we can ever stop all the trauma. We can help and work to reduce it. We can, but while other people are people and got free will, there will be trauma, I'm afraid.
And I think some of it is just education too, like letting people know, hey, here's the reality. If you have a baby as a young person who's not got your life really ready, this is the reality of your day-to-day life and what it will be. It's not just cuddles and baby and cuteness and pictures on social media. It's waking up in the middle of the night repeatedly to feed your baby. It's diaper changes for years. It's expenses. It's a lack of freedom. It's no, you can't travel. No, you can't hang out with your friends. No, you can't go out partying. It is a sacrifice if done right. You have to sacrifice your own desires and your own ease to be able to properly parent this conscious, sentient, alive creature you made. entering into that lightly is a huge mistake in my view. And I think more people just simply need to be educated about what it will mean for their day-to-day lives if they have a child they're not ready for, really ready for.
Yeah.
Gosh, back to economics. Like, I think so much, like, I love that you have an orientation towards economics, because I think a lot of the way to navigate through problems, we can't just ignore the financial aspects. We have to
Mhm.
figure out a way to make it work financially. Do you have any thoughts on what our world should look like in the future? An economic model that would work for human thriving across the board, potential, or increased human thriving with diminished human suffering.
Oh, hell yeah. Yeah.
Go for it.
So let me tell you why I'm interested in economics. I'm not. I'm totally not interested in economics. Why have I spent years now studying it? Because that's where the poison started and got in, and it's where the poison still is. And the poison being the mindset I described before, which is basically sociopathic. And basically what it tells us is what is an economy for? It's for to serve markets. It's to keep on growing. It's to keep on multiplying the amount of money. And that's the thesis. And while ever we have that, it externalizes humanity, it externalizes the planet. And that's the dominant force of our age. And that's what's, you know, and if we're going to change that, we have to change both, not just economics. Changing economics on its own wouldn't do it. We also have to change our ethics, because it's leaked, it's been implanted into the heart of civilization, and we need to reject that, and we need to embrace humanity in the sense of actively, not just as a mantra, but putting the population above the markets.
Yeah.
So at the moment we serve our markets, and that's the way our minds work. It's the way our thinking is. We need a kind of therapy to get over that, and we really do. It's, you know, it's not just that it's taught in business schools and then finds its way into the corporate world and the political world, but which is true. But it's begun to frame the whole way that our understanding of the world, so that, you know, so what we need to answer the question, what is an economy for? Well, an economy, it isn't for those things. It can't be for those things because they're self-defeating. It's, you know, you're soaring off the branch because it's disaster waiting to happen. You're soaring off the branch you're sitting on. So what should it be for? Well, it's obvious, isn't it? It was originally supposed to be for the most good for the most people. So we don't really have to guess at what it should be for. We know what it should be for. We need to move back towards that, and we need to change our keyword expectations. Our expectations of one another, our expectations of our businesses, particularly our corporate businesses, and make it unacceptable to behave in the way that we have been doing. Make it unacceptable not to put humanity first, to make it unacceptable for our governments and our politicians to be self-serving and to put either themselves first or the markets first or economic growth first, because that's a real distortion. And you know, just to finish answering your question in the round, you probably want to kind of pick at some of those things, and feel free. But I think, I mean, one of the things I've been spending the most time on over the last few months is energy. We are at the beginning of an energy revolution. you might call it digital energy, or renewable, often we talk renewable energy, but it's kind of more than that. It has we're entering an age where energy is basically free. We just need the equipment to capture and store it.
Right.
And bonus, we can have an internet of energy as well, so we can make sure it's wherever it's needed, whenever it's needed. Free energy.
That's so cool. I haven't
Yeah.
thought of it that way, but it is sort of a network of sharing.
We can have that, and the implications of that economically are huge. We've done some of the sums on this, some of the economics on this, and the big guys, the people, the incumbents, would like things to carry on as they are. They're taking technologies. They're taking technologies that are fundamentally distributed, fundamentally, can be on every roof or everywhere, and they're bringing them together into solar farms and wind farms. Why are they doing that? Well, because it's the factory model. And the factory model means that they can sell us the energy rather than having it for free, rather than owning the means of its capture and storage. So they're not going to tell us that this will free us, but it will free us. It'll free communities around the world. It'll free, communities in Middle America. It'll free communities in the UK. We did the sums. There's a project in the UK which is the flagship for community wealth building. It actually came from Cleveland originally in the States. I won't go into the detail of it, but there's a model that they use to say, okay, let's build the local economy so that we're able to, service a lot of our own needs, and the money goes around rather than out. And we've done the maths, and we think that, if we stay as we are, the money will continue to leave the local area. If we start to produce the energy, capture and store it within the area, this can be 10 times as effective as the best community wealth building model. In fact, in some places, it can be 30 times more effective. So this is and this is representative of of an opportunity that we need to obviously need. It's top priority to reduce our carbon emissions and our pollution, and we have this opportunity to do it, and we have this opportunity to build communities, and we have this opportunity to have community wealth at the same time. So that's where there's some hope, and maybe it's got to come from the bottom up.
I was going to say, this is both an economic energy kind of issue with quality access, but it also impacts global warming and health of our planet. And so it's like double good to figure out the energy issue. I want to circle back to what you were saying about capitalism. And, in my view, what capitalism, whether or not it intends to, it does end up doing this, where anybody participating in a capitalist system, if you follow the ethos of capitalism, the goal is minimum outlay of money, energy, time, resources necessary to get maximum profit. And so there is an inherently selfish, inward, self-oriented mindset associated with capitalism. At the same time, what you want to go ahead.
Let me come in there.
Yeah.
Actually, that isn't capitalism. That's the current form of capitalism.
The current form of capitalism.
Right.
Yeah.
But this is really important.
Okay.
So let's talk about other forms of society. So we'll talk about communism because it's an extreme, and capitalism, the other form of capitalism. So in communism, there's a clue in the word, everything is communally owned. So actually capitalism is about being able to own your own stuff, basically, fundamentally, and it's about being able to trade. And there's fair capitalism, and we've had something like that in the past, never perfectly. We've had something much more like that in the past than we have now, which is systematically unfair, maximizing capitalism. Nothing wrong with profit. When you start to maximize profit at the expense of everything else, you end up with where we are.
Yeah. One of the things I love about capitalism is that it does, let me back up. My mother is from Cuba, which is a communist country.
Yeah.
She left Cuba shortly after Fidel Castro took over with force and violence in an unelected fashion. And his family has been in power for decades in a country he was never elected in.
Yeah.
And the thing about communism is that nobody is incentivized to go above and beyond to achieve excellence. Really, I mean, you're incentivized to just do the minimum possible because you're going to get the same no matter what you do. So one of the things I do love about capitalism is that, man, we can create some innovations. We can get creative. We can really bump our technologies and our capacities forward to new levels when human beings are simply incentivized to do the hard work that takes. Years ago, I've been on a cruise. Have you ever been on a cruise ship? They're like a city block of one vessel, one vehicle.
Yeah.
But it's like you're in a shopping mall and a hotel and a restaurant. And like some human beings thought, you know what? And this is not new technology. I mean, the Titanic was a cruise ship, right? With fancy dining and all that. But so it's been around. But human beings had to go, you know what? We have this really difficult goal to build a massive ship. Let's do it. And they were incentivized because it would make them rich if, or get them money. So there's a real benefit to the capitalistic model whereby human innovation, human effort, like bringing the effort to the table is encouraged because there's a reward for that outlay of effort. You get something back and you get money.
I mean, for me, this is an old and settled argument. We know basically that, yes, you've got dictators and so on who will maintain themselves in power regardless and rule in whatever way they choose regardless. But that kind of communist approach is a failed system.
Oh, for sure.
It was supposed to take over the world way before now. It hasn't. But what has taken over the world isn't the reasoned, balanced form of. I just think capitalism is made into this kind of totem, but we should be realistic about what it is. And actually, what we've got right now is an extreme form, which gives permission to for the strong to oppress the weak, which gives permission to and is creating this increasing inequality, which is bad for society. It's bad for people. It's bad for all of the people, including the people who are being made mega rich by this, and living these very strange lives. But what really matters was going back to democracy. Everyone matters. Everyone should matter. That's when humanity is humanity. That's when humanity is at its best. So we need to find a way to step away from maximization and find balance.
Balance, yes. What comes up for me, I think the solution at a high level, the solution to most of humanity's problems is very simple. It's very simple when you synthesize it down. It's just be considerate of other people, be loving, treat other people like you'd want to be treated. It's what many of our religious leaders tried to tell us, treat other people like you'd like to be treated. Be loving, even to people you don't know, even to people not in your circle. Be loving in your votes, be loving in your spending, be loving in the way you interact with complete strangers. Just be a good human being. That's the solution. If we all were just really good, moral, ethical, concerned citizens, and we come together and stop doing the in-group, out-group bullshit, we could make the world a better place, a heaven for everybody. But instead, we're creating a hell here. We are creating a hell in many ways.
That's a cornerstone. And do you know what's really strange is we know a thing. We know that money can't make you happy.
Exactly.
But we also know, and if we didn't before, we do know now from the psychology, that the thing that gives meaning and the things that makes people happy is relationships.
Love.
It's being in relationships of all different kinds, but
Yes.
it's those relationships that give meaning. There is no other source of meaning. Money is empty of meaning.
Yes. I know nobody ever said on their deathbed, like, oh, I wish I would have just made some more money. No, they're going to care about the people. That, did they love? Did they forgive? Were they brave? Were they daring? Did they live their life without regret? Or did they cower to their fears? One thing I'd like to talk about polymathy a little bit too today. Because polymathy is a way to live a good life. It's a great way to have a toolkit to solve problems. It's a great way to build bridges with people who are different from you because you have more exposure, more experiences, more tools in your toolkit. So when you meet someone new, you can typically find ways to connect. This is what I heard from the polymaths I interviewed. Furthermore, I'd like to talk for a second, just briefly, about human evolution, because I feel like we're devolving in many ways right about now. There's a book called The Phenomenon of Man. It's a very old book, probably almost 100 years old at this point. This book was largely about what happens in the evolutionary process of any species. And there are two main things that happen that you find when you look at what is happening to a species that's actually evolving and becoming better, more robust, more capable.
Yeah.
Two things. One is the members of that species are no longer homogenized and similar. They become diverse. They express their ownness. Their unique essence comes out.
Yeah.
And by the way, that's what polymathy is. Each person becoming more and more individuated with zigzag combinations that will never be repeated. So polymathy is that part of evolution expressed in human form. This book also said that the other thing you find besides increased individuation is increased cooperation from those differentiated parts so that the species can collaborate like a larger single whole. And so you find more cooperation, and that's what polymathy allows for too, because like I said, when you have more tools in your toolkit, more experiences, more exposure, you can understand other people's strengths better. Studies have been done that show, oh, I've done these things. I understand what you're doing. I can understand your capabilities and help tap into that so we can collaborate as a more cohesive whole. But you can also just build bridges to more people. It's less in-group, out-group, caveman shit.
Yeah.
And it's more, okay, I get you. You're different than me, but I like that difference. I'm fascinated by the difference. Our diversity becomes our strength. We're not all one-trick ponies or all the same or all warring with each other. When we become our full, best, most authentic selves, we individuate. And then we also collaborate and cooperate, even with people who are very different from us. That's how we become our collective best selves. That's how we evolve into our potential.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think the challenge ahead of us really is, it's why I promote polymathy. It's not just like, because it's fun, to like learn about different things, because that's part of it. It's a way to become your best self, but it's also a way to advance and evolve the collective. And we are being pretty dumb right about now. We're ruining our planet. We're dehumanizing each other. We're maintaining broken systems that clearly don't work, and yet we do nothing about it. We need to do better. We need to use our brains. We've got to figure these things out. What comes up for you, Barry, when I say all that?
I mean, we touched on the educational system previously and how it regiments, you know, and the curriculum is regimented and the way it's delivered is regimented and the medium is the message in many ways.
Yes.
As far as that's concerned, and that is something we're not addressing and we should address. I one of the reasons clearly that drove me personally myself to polymathy is my, you know, my ADHD brain. So, you know how that works, fizzing with ideas, distract. It looks to the rest of the world like you're distracted. No, you're not. You just kind of so many things, you know, toys to play with. Yeah. But you know, it's more than that. But you know, these things came to me relatively late in life, by which time I, you know, done all of these different things and didn't understand quite why. So it's clear to me that there are some things, or at least some types of brain or conditions that despite the systems that we now have, drive that direction. But I would never, I would encourage people to find their curiosity, because that's the driving force, that's the engine that drive you forth as to become a polymath, isn't it? So I'd encourage anyone to find their curiosity and pursue it. I'm a little wary of saying to everyone that you should be a polymath or you must be a polymath or because I genuinely don't know whether that's a path that everyone wants to follow or could follow. Certainly in the world that we're living in at the moment, I'd love to know, you know, maybe in decades to come, if we find ways to fix the educational system, we'll find out. Maybe we can all be polymaths, but I don't know the answer.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, whether someone chooses to be a highly narrow, a very narrow specialist professionally in one career in their whole life, or they choose a polymathic sort of path professionally and in their hobbies, either way, I mean, I think the bottom line is we should all just try to live our best lives, our most authentic, truest version of ourselves. And there are going to be some people who really are passionate about one thing and want to dedicate as much energy as possible to that thing. And we need those people. We need specialists. If I'm flying on an airplane, I'd rather have a specialist. If I'm going to have a brain surgery or heart surgery, I would rather have a specialist. Once I've been diagnosed, if I want to be diagnosed, I do not want a specialist. I want someone with the bigger picture. Otherwise, I'll probably be misdiagnosed over and over again by a bunch of specialists who only see the world through their lens and their paradigm. And so everything is, you know, if all you've got is a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
However, you know, a surgeon, a very good surgeon, can be a polymath. So you don't necessarily, they're not necessarily mutually exclusive either.
That's true. That's true. You know, they could have hobbies and have had prior jobs, and yeah, absolutely. Just, you know, and this is all just a personal life journey. Everyone's got to be responsible for their own lives. Everybody's got to be responsible for their own lives. Unless you're disabled or something, obviously, then you need help. And I think, you know, part of what I wanted to mention to you too is one of my hopes for polymathy, in addition to being a bridge to connect people, because you can find more common ground. The people who are highly capable, smart, I think it's incumbent upon the polymaths of our world, the really capable, really intelligent people, to help those in need, to figure it out, to figure out the brokenness of our systems and how can we fix it, rather than staying in complacency and allowing continual dehumanization and brokenness of our institutions.
Well, so, I utterly agree with you, and I'm glad you said that. And with that in mind, one of the things I'm working towards this year with the Humane X Network is equipping change makers. So I think that polymaths have collectively and in terms of having a role, sometimes a leadership role, sometimes not, in other circumstances, have I'm going to call it an opportunity as well as a duty to think about the big picture, to think about the big issues. And I, going forwards, one of the things I aspire to do is to inspire other change makers, but also equip them with some of the tools that we've worked on that are elsewhere and out there. So I think you're right. If you don't mind me saying this, if there's polymaths out there, who want to come together and focus on some of these societal problems, either the ones I've mentioned or things that you've identified, please do get in touch. Please do join the network, the HumaneX network, and please let us know. And one of my joys in life is as a meta connector, if you like, is I enjoy bringing people together and enabling them to find a focus and so on, and to pursue it and so yeah, I absolutely agree with you.
Can you tell us a little bit more about HumaneX Network? What's the purpose of it? How do people get involved exactly? Just tell us more, whatever you want to share.
Yeah, so HumaneX Network has sort of come about as a development from humane economics. Humane economics I've described and where it came from. But as it's grown and broadened, it's not really just about economics any longer. And the X is like, SpaceX exploration. So within that, we have multiple projects and more as we go. So one of the most prominent ones at the moment is about energy and the problems with the energy system and the factory model being so dominant and excluding some of the developments I've described and that we need. So we're working on that. There's other things in the more sort of psychological and or philosophical areas. So there's a project that we're working on called Dignity Donut, which is about human dignity and the work you're building on the work of Donna Hicks, who's done brilliant work coming from the angle of conflict resolution, done brilliant work on the understanding of the nature of humanity and linking that to some of the latest science that people like Nicholas Christakis, and he's got a book called Blueprint, which is really about the nature of humanity as as an animal and as a society, bringing that together. And I was saying how difficult earlier how difficult it is to step out of the financialized and the financialized maximizing frame. So we're working on tools to enable people to do that, to literally step outside of their day-to-day and see it in a new light. What could that job look like? What could that organization look like? What could your life look like if it was living in a world which based on the valuing of humanity? So the HumaneX network is that and other things that are coming along around governance and so on. It's very easy to join. It's completely free to join. We want people to be able to join very easily. You just come to humanex.network, and you can join there for free. It's not there's different sections. There's growing sections on Dignity Donut and the energy section and so on.
Dignity Donut, I love that. Because I've studied who's in prison, I've concluded, poverty leads to incarceration, leads to human torture and dehumanization on a mass scale. It's a significant problem. It's one of many problems we as the human species need to figure out. And what ends up happening when, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like when your basic needs are not met, when you don't have housing, food, love, security, warmth, like when you don't have your basic needs met, You do bad things. Everybody would. Everybody would. Like if you had to choose, will I steal that loaf of bread? Will I steal that formula for my infant child? Or will I let death occur? We have such a drive to survive. We will do bad things to survive if we have to, if we're in a position because of poverty. And so figuring out a successful economic model for everybody. It's not just a nice thing to do. It will make our society better because we'll have less crime, less violence, less, unrest in the streets.
Yeah.
We've got to figure out how people can survive financially so they don't have to do bad things, so they don't have to numb out on drugs all the time because they hate their poverty-stricken lives so much.
Yeah.
One of the organizations I really have a lot of respect for, I'll share with you. I'm not sure if you've heard of it, Barry. It's called Source. My friend Lila, may she rest in peace. She died a few years ago. She and I met at a summer camp at Yale in about 1996 or 7. And we kept in touch a little bit all these years. And she turned into this amazing, like, quasi-celebrity because she figured out a way to give work to people in Africa, mostly, who were poverty-stricken. Giving people the option to make money. And I'm not sure how it works with AI in the future. Like, we don't want to give human beings crappy jobs. We want to give them jobs that are humanized and humanizing, right? So it's not like any job, but she was able to create jobs for thousands of people in poverty-stricken countries and make a huge impact that way. It's called Source.
Yeah.
And Lila, may she rest in peace, was an amazing person who and her organization still exists today. So I think, figuring out this economic, and it's not just a British thing, it's not just an American thing, at some point we've got to figure this out as a species.
Yeah,
how
absolutely.
do we make it? One of the little known facts about me, I've been to over 40 countries on 6 continents. I love to see the world. I love to learn. It's an amazing way to learn and to meet people, to hear stories, to see how people live. I've lived abroad several times, and I lived in London. I've lived in Argentina. And I've seen the poverty that exists, in many other countries, not a lot in Europe. Go to South America, if you go to Africa, go even to Asia, Central America, North America. I mean, the amount of homelessness, there's people living in favelas and townships and campsites, human beings living like animals.
Yeah.
There are animals who live better. There are many animals who live
Yeah.
better than a large population of humans on this planet.
Yeah.
Especially if they're not first world countries. So we have got to figure that out. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, couple of things. First of all, look, we have the technology, we can feed everyone. But we base our economic system on scarcity. We don't need to do that anymore.
We can figure this out.
We don't need to do that. The other thing is, I mentioned Nicholas Christakis's book Blueprint before. You'll really enjoy it. One of the in the first section of the book, he does a survey over the last 200-300 years of isolated communities that have come about through like shipwreck or similar. And the stories of cannibalism and terrible stories, but there's also the opposite. There's also and those communities can build themselves in different ways, so there's a lot to learn from that. And as we're sort of drawing to a close, I guess the thing I'd like to just say is, we can do this. There is hope, and we are. The UN head is right. We've still got our foot on the accelerator. We need to take it off. We need to find a new path, but it's still doable. But we need to find ways to detox our thinking. And I think that's the big project that I'm dedicated to anyway. You know, how do we as a civilization, as you say, it's more than the UK or America, it's how do we as a civilization find a new way to think about ourselves and humanity as a part of a bigger whole.
Yeah. And I think this, I guess I'll make this my final thought, is in order to evolve and advance, to transcend our apeness and to become our more actualized collective humanity, we have got to accept that we're different. There is diversity, and you got to still care about people who aren't like you. You may have money, you may have a home, you may have a warm dinner to eat tonight, but what about the people who don't? Do you care about them? And what are you going to do about it if you do? So I think this outward mindset, this consideration, this empathy, compassion, this is what humanity needs. That's the mindset we need. We need to be loving. We need to do unto others as we would have done unto us. We need to do unto others as they want done to them. We've got to care. We've got to stop warring and otherizing and outgrouping and making enemies of people just for being different. Because the fact is, it is our diversity that we need to survive as a species. If we're all the same, not going to work well. We need a diverse, you know, like when there's diversity in the gene pool, when there's diversity in your gut microbiome, or in your personhood, or in your society, it makes you more robust. It gives you more, it gives the society more capabilities. We need to embrace our difference and appreciate people who are very different from us, even those groups that we consider less than, like the ones who are poor and uneducated and homeless, maybe.
Yeah.
We've got to see their humanity and care about it too.
Yeah, and we need wisdom, and there's wisdom right there. That, you know, that's the beginning of wisdom.
Well, thank you, Barry. It has been so fun to chat with you. I hope we'll have many more discussions like this. They're always so deep and insightful whenever we chat. And so thank you for this opportunity to get to know you and your thoughts a bit more. Can't wait to share this with everybody on YouTube and Polymath Place.
Thank you, Angela. I've really enjoyed our conversation. I'm looking forward to the next one already. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much.